Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Hello and welcome. Often I'm asked about the difference between various schools and traditions in Buddhism, like the southern school of Theravada compared to the what's referred to as the northern school of Mahayana. And I'm also asked about travel, why I have travelled, why I am where I am. And the two questions are not that far apart. The answers are not, at least. So I was ordained into the Theravada tradition, which is the southern school, and thus named. The Pali word Theravada means way of the elders and is considered to be the way of practice closest to the original Vinaya Pitaka, that is the rules and guidelines set down for monks and nuns established during the time of the Buddha and eventually written down later on, having been passed by word of mouth for some years, and also the Sutta Pitaka, which are the teachings of the Buddha, in the Pali language referred to collectively, including the Abhidharma, as the Pali Canon, or the Tipitaka, the three baskets. So the basket of books containing the rules, the basket of books containing the teachings, and the basket of books containing the additional commentaries and more detailed explanations of those teachings that came somewhat later. So that's the traditional explanation. But in the time of the Buddha, before his final parinibbana, when he died, leaving samsara, this round of rebirths into realms of existence, his final being this human realm and his opportunity to attain to parinibbana, freedom from that, freedom from suffering in this lifetime, attaining to arahantship, and then freedom from rebirth into further realms. Prior to that, he instructed the Sangha, the established monks whom had become arahants, so fully enlightened within his lifetime, to go north, south, east and west, not proselytizing, not preaching, but living in accordance with the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path by way of example, by way of teaching the Dharma, without chasing people around saying, hey, you must convert, you must do this, but by simply showing an alternative and better way of living, a better way of life, that of the samana, the renunciant, bhikkhu or bhikkhuni. But also showing, as the Buddha showed us, both as lay people and as monastics, the way to follow the Noble Eightfold Path and practice it fully whether you are living in lay life or you are fully ordained into monastic life, a life of renunciation. So this was done. The monks, the nuns, they went north, they went south, east and west. And through this journey, this travel in all directions, and without going by way of converting and preaching, but just living amongst existing communities, many cultural conditions applied and rituals, tendencies, other religions, other influences became not in exchange of what the Buddha teaches, what the Buddha taught, or in any way in opposition to the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path, but became a part and inclusive of the practice in addition. So if you go north into the Himalayas, north of India, you'll find influences in Buddhism there from the traditions and religions that existed there long before Buddhism came along. And similarly in all of the other directions. So one of the questions I'm asked is, how did I come to pick Theravada? Firstly, I researched them all, and I went to India. I went to what we could describe as the center of Buddhism, or the Mecca of Buddhism in the world, Bodh Gaya, where I eventually ordained, but in my first trip as a layperson, I stayed in various monasteries, visited various temples, and met with different monks of all of these different schools of Buddhism, because that being the center is the place where most of them gravitate for pilgrimage, to pay homage to the original place of enlightenment under the Bodhi tree there at the Mahabodhi temple. And it is renowned as such. So it is an ideal place to live for a little while, a short while, and experience for a while as a lay person, or it was then, this is going back some years now, the lives of those renunciants whom have come from traditions far and wide, north, south, east and west, but come back to the center of Buddhism to practice, maybe just to stay and be caretaker of a temple or a monastery or an ashram of such for a short while. But they're there and they're continuing their own type of practice, but all in the same location. So after my initial research there, I went to visit and see what I could find out in more detail. Not to specifically make a choice, but just to see how it was, how monastic life was for the different traditions. In my own country, you'd say this was in the north, in the west, this is in the UK, I only had experience of Theravada Buddhism from the Thai forest tradition, emanating from Thailand, the school, the lineage of Ajahn Chah, that of Ajahn Mun, and I thought I must expand and broaden my horizons before committing to any particular tradition, school or way of life. So the question I'm asked as to what is the difference can be answered, actually there is no difference, other than what has occurred with the original teachings of the Buddha from that Pali canon, from that Tipitaka, as it's been practiced, additionals, option extras that have been picked up along the way. And I found when I was staying in, one question I had was, what about Tibetan compared to Theravadan Buddhism? When I stayed in the Tibetan monasteries, I really didn't know what was going on. There was a lot of ceremony, a lot of tea, butter tea drinking, a lot of horns and bells and whistles and noise and goings on, which didn't to me correlate or relate to what I'd come to understand as Buddhist practice as far as the Noble Eightfold Path was concerned. And to me at that time, in my naivety, I considered it a lot of unnecessary rites and ritual. But it is not necessarily unnecessary rites and ritual. You'll see in Thailand, in Burma, here in Sri Lanka, and in some monasteries in India, although their own Theravada school of Buddhism in India is very much in accordance with the traditional idea of Theravada Buddhism, practicing as taught in the Tipitaka, the Pali Canon, without too much additional rites and ritual or added extras. Consequently, one of the reasons I chose to ordain there rather than elsewhere, it seemed to me more basic. I won't say more pure, because what is added doesn't necessarily take anything away. If we imagine a car, an average car, with seats, steering wheels and various things like windows to open and close, and then take two extremes. We could have a go-kart kind of racing car with the very bare minimum, an engine, a seat and driving mechanism to get from A to B as quickly as possible. Or we could have a luxury vehicle with lots of optional extras, electric windows, heated seats, air conditioning, power steering, this, that and the other. Now, they both have the same aim, to get from A to B. The racing car more quickly, without distraction. But the luxury limousine, with as much support and comfort and confidence behind you in that journey as possible. So we consider all of these extras, not rites and rituals, as in the praying and worshipping, hoping for a God to answer all of your needs way, but as ways of developing additional faith, saddha, we call it in the Pali language, confidence in the practice or behind your practice, in this establishment of routine, of ceremonies and occasions that go along with the practice of the monks and the nuns, but are mostly celebrated and for the benefit of the lay people supporting those monks and nuns. So for instance, here in Sri Lanka at the moment, it was very wonderful but very noisy weekend, because it's the Vasa, the rainy period season, has just ended. After which we have Pararana, I talked about, I think, the forgiveness ceremony on the last day, the full moon of October, followed by which we have the new robes offering ceremony called Katina. We simply get, I was given new robes just prior because they had to be mailed, but offered correctly by some Thai friends of mine, which I then made the determination at the end of the Vasa to abandon my old robes. They will be made into sitting cloths or bags or washing, drying cloths or whatever, but they're 3 or 4 years old now, so they needed to be changed. You make the determination to take on your new set of robes that's been offered, of just 3, upper robe, lower robe and outer robe, over there Sangati. And I was fortunately, and I've gratefully received the Shivra Dana robe offering of a new set of robes. So 2 lower robes for practicality, an upper robe, this Jiwan they call it in Thailand, because they were in need of replacement. And that is the traditional idea. But behind the Katina ceremony, going back originally, as they've been doing in my monastery back in southern India, Bangalore this weekend, at their Katina celebrations, the lay people over one evening and one night, and very early in the morning before dawn, literally weaved the fabric. These were made especially for me, but they didn't, I don't think, weave the fabric. But in India there, back at my mother monastery, if you like, they had the Hmong people, the people from Chakma in the northern eastern part of India, not far from where the Buddha originated, Kapilavastu, which is sort of more on the border of Nepal and India now. Those Hmong-speaking Chakma people come down regularly, and there are many residents and monks there in my home monastery from that area, but they came down and they observed these strict traditions, and they wove the cloth from thread into material to be then sewn into robes, all before dawn the next day, to be offered to the Sangha. That is the traditional and Katina festival as was practiced by lay people right even back in the time of the Buddha. But of course, as time has gone by, as time goes on, this Katina festival has grown and adapted into many other celebrations that go along with offerings of all of the requisites of food, shelter, more robes, clothing and medicines, and even money and donations are offered in the correct manner to temples and monasteries and the sanghas throughout the world on their allotted Katina celebration days, which can be for up to 1 month after the full moon, the Uposatha day of October. So I think this year ending on about the 15th of November, something like that, the full moon of November. And during that time, being in a Buddhist country where there are many temples, there will be perhaps every weekend, for the convenience of lay people, they in Sri Lanka here have a normal Monday to Friday working week, with the exception of full moons, which is a national holiday, when they have that off. So that's kind of like the Western idea of a working week. So the normality is to have the Katinas at a weekend. So probably for every weekend to come for the next month, there will be Katina celebrations in the temples, reminding me much like and of those Tibetan traditions with horns and drums and traditional chanting of a slightly different nature to what you might hear me chant in the mornings. But all of these extra things that have come along as cultural influences later than the original practice, but not detrimental to it, very much in fact supportive of it. Coming to Buddhism, however, late in life, I chose to take away the optional extras and felt with a very short time to practice and hopefully become free from suffering in this lifetime, I had to dispense with the luxury goods, the air conditioning, the heated seats, the electric windows, and so on, and just go for the racing car to really get there as quickly as possible with intense practice, which is why I live in the way I do, rather than in a monastery with a few more optional extras and additional comforts. I have a more secluded life of a renunciant practicing the way I do, having adopted some of the Dhutanga practices. I mean, one of those 13 allowable ascetic practices we call Dhutanga practices is to just use 3 robes rather than having maybe a spare robe here or maybe a few spare robes for convenience. Now I just have the one. I found that for more practical reasons mostly. I mean, I'm not having to do any laundry or washing or worry about caring for other robes or taking them with me if I have to travel. I simply have just this 3 pieces of cloth, and that is sufficient. So this is one reason, another reason why I chose that simplicity of the renunciant life. It seemed to me more in accordance with the original life of the Buddha and teachings of the Buddha and the Sangha and his disciple in that lineage thereafter. So on travel, I was asked, because it seems, if you look, I think these videos I've been making here on this channel now for 2 years, because I started in Navassa a couple of years ago, so not long. I've made quite a few because I have the opportunity, being alone, to most days sit and talk like this, answering or talking about your comments and your questions and giving the occasional Dharma talk. Someone has noticed I've been in various countries. I've travelled a lot, it seems. But actually, I haven't. I have. I've been in India. It says in the channel description specifically, but if I remember rightly, I've really only been in India, Thailand, and now here, Sri Lanka. I first went to India and then followed up, having decided on the Southern School Theravada Buddhism, to train and practice and partially live in Thailand, where I went for 5 years, between there and England, my home country, and the monastery there. Then, having decided to ordain, I ordained in India, where I lived for 3 years. Then I went back to Thailand for some 7 or 8 months and then returned to India, because we have to stay with our original ordination, Sangha and monastery, or within striking distance, let's say, which here almost is, because we're not that geographically far away from India in Sri Lanka. And then I came to Sri Lanka, where I am now. And in those places, unlike a traveller or a tourist or a holiday maker, someone asked me for travel tips. I said, well, follow the Noble Eightfold Path, practice in accordance with the Noble Eightfold Path, and this is the best, whatever you're doing, wherever you're going, the best travel tip I can offer as a monk. I can't tell you which ATM to use because we don't use money. I can't tell you the best restaurant because we only eat what's offered in the morning. I can't tell you the best hotels. We're not allowed to stay in such places. Or even what to wear, because we only wear these robes. So, frankly, I'm not a very good expert on travel, even though it seems I've been to all of these places. And in this time also, because someone asked why do I travel, for various reasons, for visa reasons, the only reasons really, but for various reasons you have to sometimes, after say 6 months or 1 year, leave the country and then return. So one place I've gone to, that was the reason for my visit to Thailand last time, and I decided to stay there for quite some bit longer than a quick trip for a visa run. But often if you're relatively near to a border, I was in Bodh Gaya, I went to Nepal and stayed there for 10 days or so, because it wasn't terribly far, all within the area really, the place, the birth of the Buddha, Lumbini, which is now in Nepal, and Bodh Gaya was where he was enlightened, was his region. So it wasn't too difficult a trip to nip across a border there, in order that my visa would still be valid, because after 6 months, even a long visa, you still have to leave the country and then you can return again. So that is the reason for my travel. But unlike a tourist, a holiday maker or a traveller, when I get to a destination, the country that I've chosen to go to, that is it. I don't go sightseeing or travelling around. So if people ask me how much, well, have you been in Sri Lanka now for a year? Have you seen this? Have you seen that? Have you seen the other? No, because I got here, found this place and have stayed. It suits my practice, and this is the purpose of my travel. Well, my visa had come to the time to exit, so I came here with no fixed views as to how long I would be, but found a wonderful place to practice where I could go on alms round, receive my food each day. They've given me shelter, and I'm able to live within that original practice that I've discovered by way of the elders, this Theravada tradition, in its most simplest form, but not too different from the original Theravada form. After all, the core and most important thing is that we are in accordance with the Vinaya Pitaka, that first basket of books, of our guidelines, our rules for monks and nuns. So what I now answer when asked this question about what's best, Mahayana, what's best, Theravada, Tibetan, Vajrayana, Zen, Pure Land, this, that and the other. There are so many schools, and within those different northern and southern schools, different traditions and lineages, because of the length of time, more than nearly 2,600 years since the Buddha's time, that adaptations have been made and organizations have come and gone. In terms of lineages of Buddhism, even the Bhikkhuni, the female version of monks, Bhikkhuni lineage did diminish and die out to some extent for many years, and is going through a process of revival these days, to balancing out the fourfold assembly of there being lay men, lay women, monks and nuns, the supportive 4 legs of a table, which would be unstable if you think of the Buddhist religion, the sasana, as a tabletop Without one of those limbs, legs, it would become unstable. So an important part of its regeneration of the bhikkhuni lineage is to assist with that support and make that back and stable again, to continue and last. But my own practice is such that if we consider don't mix the words up with a sutta, the Heartwood Sutta, but if we I think of hardwood being a resilient type of wood we would make furniture or something out of that needed to be able to last for a long time. If we take the Buddha's teachings as a good quality hardwood, such as redwood or oak or something of this nature, and people might have a piece of hardwood furniture of something, and over time they may find that it needs something we call knotting, which is you give some treatment to any areas where there are little branches used to come out of the wood, where some seepage of sap might come. I think that would be more with softwoods, but anyway, you add some treatment, some solution to the wood to stop leakage, to stop the integrity of the surface being breached, to keep it clean, to keep it pure. And much like the practice, our practice of eradicating our kilesas, our defilements of greed, hatred and delusion, through keeping precepts, through meditation and through developing wisdom. We're doing this. We're refining the tabletop, for instance, by practicing and identifying any little, what would you call them, extrusions or problems that might occur in the future, and giving them care and treatment in the first instance. Then might be added to this piece of wood or a tabletop a primer, a coat of very thin paint or treatment to soak into the wood, to allow an undercoat, another coat of paint to be laid on top of that or applied. And this is much like the layers and the additions that have been added to the practice and to the teachings of the Buddha by these different schools, these different traditions, and what have become organized religions in Buddhism, and large organized religions in Buddhism, in Buddhist countries and even outside of Buddhist countries. You'll see many big temples, many big golden Buddha rupas, many statues or stupas, and these are all supportive. But these are much like the additional coatings that go onto this tabletop. So after the primer, an undercoat, and then on top of that a top coat, and then maybe a layer of gloss on top of that. And this can really represent what has become Buddhist religion throughout the world, however you label it, whether it's Tibetan, Mahayana, or Theravada. And even in this traditional old way of the elders, old school Theravada Buddhism, there are many layers. And here they call them Nikayas. But in different parts of the world, there are different references to these different parts of the Sangha, whom have their own traditions and additions and optional extras. Layers of veneer, coats of paint, building this up to a gloss finish. And a beautiful finish to support the lay people, the Sangha, and assist with them in their development of faith in the practice. But as a soul practitioner, which I've really always been, even within my Sangha, I chose to practice meditation as being my work. My kamatana, which is work, you could choose as a kamatana monk something practical. Building stupas, building monasteries and temples, making Buddha rupas, something like this. Or teaching even school children, education. Very much of this goes on in the Parinyas, the schools here, for little children by the monks who are the teachers. Or you could choose meditation as your project, kamatana, and I chose that. And I didn't, with that, need anything other than the knotting, the little bits of solution to try and eradicate the kilesas. And this I've done by using really coarse sandpaper of harsh practice, ascetic practice, Jutanga practices, just one meal a day and only what's been offered into my bowl, rather than you can have breakfast and any amount of things really up until noon. But I choose to stick by the one meal eaters practice there in the Jutangas and just eat what's offered into my bowl and nothing thereafter, nothing before that, each and every day. And walking in bare feet to get that on Pindapata and not eating anything gained in any other way. So this festival time of year for the next month, I've been invited to many Katina, or so far a couple. Last year I was invited to many, and I'll admit I didn't go to any Katina festivals last year, not even back at I went to my own in India, then I came here. I didn't go to any here because their optional extras are again different to what I've experienced or become used to, and didn't feel them necessary as a part of my practice. But I think probably this year, if I've been invited to one already or a couple, I'll probably go to one or two just to be considerate of those practices and what's going on. As there are so many, it does me no harm to take 1 or 2 days and have this extra bit of lunch that they have there and go to their ceremonies and become, pay my respect to the monks there. Most here, of which are more senior than me, because most have ordained since the earliest age of 20, they can here, and have been monks, and they're now, if they're my age, they've been monks for say 37 years if they ordained at 20. So they're all Mahateros, or Teros as they call them here, but Mahatera in the Pali, monks of more than 20 years, Vasas. So maybe I'll go to a few of those. But with all of those things going on, and all of those choices that one can see and one can decide between, I still chose that I would be just this piece of hardwood, which needs nothing more. This is just an analogy. I'm not by any means describing my own qualities as such, but there's nothing more needed with a good piece of oak than to, with a piece of paper, sand off the any discrepancies or extrusions, and then a polish. And one would slowly and gradually build up a polished finish of the natural wood itself. And I see the practice that I have taken upon myself from the original idea of Theravada Buddhism as being just that. The hardwood, and even the heartwood of hardwood, that I am slowly and gradually bringing to a state of a polished finish within this lifetime is my goal, my aim, without adding to it any extra layers of varnish or coats of paint, even primer. Just using the qualities and the longevity that has been proven over time for the Buddha's teachings to be, having remained this long, 2,000, nearly 500 or 600 years, unchanged, unaffected, those core teachings to be the solid foundation for practice that I have chosen. So that it doesn't mean that I exclude or consider inferior anything else in addition to that. In fact, to the contrary, it is very supportive for both the Sangha and for lay people to have all of those extras that build faith through those rituals that are practiced mindfully by way of remembering and bringing their attention, their mindfulness back to the core teachings, which always remains, wherever you go, north, south, east or west, at the heart of whatever tradition or school of Buddhism we're referring to. So for this reason, travel tips, I'm not the person to ask, because I get to this place and that's what I've seen of Sri Lanka. Really, this room, this kuti, and my arms round. And I don't look to see any more. Now, there are some holy places I'll visit in due course, no doubt, when I'm here, but I'm in no hurry to do so. This would be outside of my practice. I did that in my early stages through my research of Buddhism. And as for the differences between the traditions, whether it's Tibetan and Theravada or all of the others, then that is the explanation. There, at the core, at the heart of it, there are no differences. We're all the same. We're practicing Buddhists. What you see are optional extras in addition to that. So, as we progress through this coming month into the Katina season, I may go to a few of these functions to show my face out of respect, pay my respects to the senior monks in my immediate locality, but then continue with my practice of simply my morning live puja, as you can join me in each and every day, whether live or later on, it doesn't matter, whenever it's the morning for you. When I simply do a short chant of reflecting on the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, followed by one of the core, we call the core sequences of suttas, the Mangala Sutta, the Ratana Sutta, and the Kalyana Metta Sutta. Then there are many other paritas, or suttas, that we chant, but for the purposes of my morning live chanting, I keep those very short, and they're all similar length, and it means the short chanting allows us together to each day have 15 minutes meditation, which isn't long at all. I've meditated usually for a few hours prior to that chanting every morning, because I wake at 3 for meditation, and then this chanting starts at 6 a.m. before going on alms round at 6:30. So you can join me for that. Someone asked why I picked those 3. For that reason. They also, to me, represent, in fact, we pay homage to and we reflect upon the 9 qualities of the Buddha in the Itipiso, and the qualities of the Dharma and the Sangha. And really, the Mangala Sutta, the blessings of the practice, represents to me Buddhism as a whole. So like the Buddha, the triple gem, the Triratna, the triple gem we have taken refuge in. When we take refuge in the triple gem, we take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. And we say we're going to take refuge by saying Bhutang Saranang Gacchami, Dhammang Saranang Gacchami, Sanghang Saranang Gacchami 3 times. This is taking refuge. But my paying homage to the Buddha, Dharma, the Sangha is then reflected, I think, by the Mangala Sutta. I've chosen that one as my usual routine, just because it's a good length to fit into the short space of time I have. Whereas the Dhammacakka Sutta is way too long for that time in the morning, although traditionally would be something monks would chant in a morning, has become a ritual in many monasteries. For instance, here every Monday, the Dhammacakka Sutta is chanted many times on a Monday morning each week somewhere. It's usually a recording that's played over and over again, but this is a practice that's become an optional extra. But for me, keeping it simple, it's just these 3 reflections, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and then I choose Mangala Sutta. It kind of represents the Buddha, Buddhism as a whole, when you understand the English or your own language's translation, the meaning of the Pali words I chant. The Ratana Sutta is also then reflective of the Dharma, and then the Kalyana Metta Sutta is the way we should behave, and that reflects upon, or is a reflection, a further reflection upon the Sangha. So those 3 suttas on separate days, one after the other, 3 days consecutively, kind of enhances my reflection. So it's my own choice, and they're the core sequence that we as monks have to know, and it's easy for me to fit into that time. So no other more complicated reason than that. You'll find where you've got people with the opportunity to be chanting or wanting to practice chanting a lot of the day, they'll go through a much more complex sequence of including those, but other suttas, which are verse forms of the word of the Buddha from that original Tipitaka or the Pali Canon itself. but put into prose, into easily memorized form. So a very wonderful way of reflecting on the suttas, learning the suttas. And I mean, this is very much a practice here in Sri Lanka, that monks would have to know all of the suttas, perhaps off by heart, in the Pali language and their own language, and as well as their chanting form. But this has never been my choice. I mean, even with the core sequence, I have to look at my book. I have to remind myself, otherwise, especially it being live, my mind could go blank at my age, my time in life. So, but that's the reason for that. And really, that is my practice. And what I've spoken about today is really why I do what I do and what this actually is. What this is I'm practicing, what would you call it? Is he a Theravada monk? Is he a Mahayana monk? Well, I'm a Theravada monk by way of ordination, and I'm practicing the way of the elders. So my reference is the Pali Canon, so the southern school of Buddhism. But I haven't chosen to adopt any of the optional extras, and have chosen also to live in solitude apart from my own Sangha, which is back there in India. For this time for my practice to develop, with their support of course, and then with, most importantly, the support of the lay people in this area who understand fully that is what I'm doing. That is perhaps why my robes are this colour and their monks' robes are a different colour, or this colour over there, because not for any particular reason. The traditional forest monk who may have adopted Jitanga practices is usually in these natural dyes. This is the jackfruit tree, heartwood of the jackfruit tree dye that makes this particular colour. And as you see, by a few years' time, without re-dyeing it every month, which you do get the opportunity to do sometimes, in my Thai monastery we did this religiously every Uposatha, so every 15 days we would dye these in the jackfruit heartwood vat, and there's a video on here, you can watch it, of that being done, me doing that. And I've also done it here in Sri Lanka once or twice, but even so my robes went almost that colour with time, and now they're back to this dark brown colour again, which isn't in the light not so dark, but on there looks dark. Anyway, these are little peculiarities, but they're not rites, they're not rituals, they're not religious religious things for the sake of religiosity, put it that way. They're just practical reasons. There's practical reasons behind most of what we see and what we do and how we practice in Buddhism, as opposed to the idea of this will bring you good luck, or this will make this happen, the idea of prayer and worship. It is very much, as the Buddha has taught us, for us to practice ourselves, to see for ourselves how we can become free from suffering in this lifetime, without looking externally for any other assistance, other than the basic support for the Sangha, that is, having renounced worldly life, so the use of money, other than the basic support of lay people, to provide the necessary means, the basic means of food, clothing, shelter and medicine, which is all we require. But it's not to say that if you live in a monastery with a lot more going on than that, it's still okay, because your core practice is still Sila, Samadhi, Panya, the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path. So, for travel tips, get out the what do they used to call it? Lonely Planet. In last time I used a travel guide, before Google and Booking.com. And other than that, I've just really gone and practiced the Noble Eightfold Path as one does as a monk, and hope for the best. Hope someone will give you some food. And most people in the world are kind and will do that, even in non-Buddhist countries. As for travelling all over the place, I haven't actually. If you look at the time in one place, I've been here now for a year, in one place, this one place. I did move accommodation at the beginning, but all within 300 or 400 metres. area. So just change whilst they got this room, this little kuti ready for me. So I haven't travelled much. I did shoot at the first time I had to go after 6 months to a quick trip to Thailand and back for visa reasons, and shortly I have to do the same. But this time I'll go quickly to India and back, but literally there and back, because that can be done in a very short time, within a day. Other than that, travelling is not on my agenda. It's not something I do. Prior to this, I did travel quite a bit, so in my lifetime as a lay person. But since choosing this practice, I've tried to find somewhere where I can not travel, where I can stay put for as long as possible. And so far, it's really been here. I've been able to establish myself and stay here the longest that I've stayed anywhere else, because they are, apart from it being Buddhist country and I'm well supported here, as well as by yourselves, the visa restrictions, there are no real visa restrictions for me. As long as I leave the country every 6 months, I can come back and keep a long-term visa. Whereas in India now, I have to leave the country for a whole 6 months. If I'm there for 6 months, 180 days, that's it. I then cannot, within that year, return to India. So to avoid that, I've become a permanent fixture more so here, where I don't have to keep moving around. And also trips to India can afford me the opportunity to visit my own Sangha, when and when appropriate in the future. So it may seem I've travelled a lot from the videos, but I haven't really. Not perhaps as much as someone even in their own country, what they might do at the weekend and where they might go, even visiting relatives with their travels, and people going on holidays. Some people going on holiday once a year or twice a year to a different destination is travelling far more than me, because I've literally has been in 3 places since 2015, 10 years. So it's not very, I did go to Cambodia for a little while, and I went to Nepal, as I just explained, for a little while. So it's really 5 places. But as far as permanent places, excluding those visa trips, I've been in the same 3 places for about the 10 years now. England, also UK. I visited there in that time and have been there for a little while in that time, so that would be 4 places, wouldn't it? So it's not too many. So on that note, I hope there's something of use, is useful there, even if it isn't travel tips, but I hope it gives you an idea that whatever traditions you see or you understand, what we look towards is the core teachings of the Buddha. The Noble Eightfold Path, the 4 Noble Truths, which concludes with the Noble Eightfold Path. There's suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and this path leading to the end of suffering. The path of right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. This is Sila, moral virtue, Samadhi, meditation, and Panya, wisdom, the development of wholesome mind states, and the reduction of unwholesome mind states. 2, ultimately eradicate the kilesas, or the defilements of lobha, dosa, moha, greed, hatred, and delusion. That is bringing us down to the polished hardwood, finished oak, solid, smooth, shining surface of our practice. This is my intention, and I hope I share that with all you, and you can benefit from that also. And if not, then just let it go. But until next time, be happy and stay well. Sukhi Hotu.